The state budget stalemate goes on, but some more bills are getting paid. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state government, sometimes the federal government, and how it just might affect your life. Boy, if you're living in Springfield these days and you work for the state, it's affecting your life. And we're going to talk about it with a couple of people who are at the Capitol a lot. Andy Maloney is here. His office is in the Capitol. He is State House Bureau Chief for Chicago Daily Law Bulletin. Welcome back.
Good to be
Andy.
back.
And Jordan Abudayyeh is here also, the State House reporter for News Channel 20 WICS in Springfield.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So, Comptroller Leslie Munger, who got appointed by the governor on his inauguration day to replace Judy Bartopinka, who was reelected but unfortunately passed away in December. So Leslie Munger has the lousy job of trying to figure out what bills to pay and what court orders to follow to pay bills. So Jordan, she did announce this week that there are a thing or two more she is going to pay even without a state budget in place.
Yeah, so early intervention was one of those big things. It is therapy services for children from 0 to 3 years who are developmentally or physically behind their peers. A very important program to a lot of kids throughout the state of Illinois who need it. Also, the community care program, which is aides that come in and help elderly people do their daily living. It's two more programs that were maybe a couple pressure points left that we have seen go
right.
now.
Well, as we've seen various groups come forth and say, we need a state budget, you know, I was at a couple where there were elderly people talking about nobody can come to my house for a few hours a week to, you know, handle the cleaning and this is what we need. I don't want to go to a nursing home kind of a thing.
Right, so we're losing these pressure points one by one. So it seems like more and more of the state budget is being enacted without the General Assembly making any moves. And that's, of course, who wants to take the heat for these very valuable, very popular programs stopping amid an impasse caused by politics. Nobody wants to take the heat for that. Munger doesn't want to take the heat for that. She's going to have to run for re-election. The governor doesn't want that heat on him. Republicans don't want it. And the Democrats this was their only point, saying, hey, look at all these things that are suffering amid your impasse. So they're using it to their advantage. So nobody wants this.
Yeah, and I'm sure there will still be some more. Andy, I think we're spending, this wouldn't change the overall calculus probably very much that under court orders or the appropriation for education that the governor did sign for K through 12, the state is spending about 90% of the budget along a clip the same as last year, which is some higher levels than even would be this year under a budget that the Democrats passed, but the governor vetoed because they haven't reached an agreement. So there are still lots of services, I'm sure, that are suffering.
Right, yeah, and that's a really good point to make because we start off not having the budget and sort of not knowing how exactly that's going to play out. Well, then we start hearing most of the budget is sort of happening anyway through these court orders and Leslie Munger choosing to pay some, as Jordan pointed out. But I think this also sort of highlights that things are still sort of falling through the cracks. Former Governor Edgar a few weeks ago said something like, well, if we're still here in a few weeks, we're going to start to see the wheels come off. And I think we are kind of starting to see the wheels come off. Some social service programs, childhood programs, after-school programs. We just heard that lots of people in those situations have had to lay off a lot of people.
Right, the agencies that get the state money to do those things.
Right, exactly.
Are not getting paid. And then, well, higher education is one that's kind of looming. I know that some people think, despite the fact that the big institutions like the University of Illinois have reserves they can run on, payments are always slow or lagged, but there's no authority to pay higher education anything from the new fiscal year, which began July 1st without a budget. So by like second semester, maybe some of the smaller state schools might have problems keeping their doors open, and then obviously that's the kind of thing that would affect lots of people.
Right, and when payment delays are happening, even though you have this sort of implicit guarantee that money depending on, it depends on how much, but money is going to come eventually. Without sort of that certainty, you have higher ed organizations, other problems facing services.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Jordan, I think you were among those. I've seen a couple of stories, but you did one about how long it's been since the governor and the 4 leaders of the legislature sat down, and I, just as background, and people who watch the show, probably many of them know this, but in recent years, the way the budget comes together is, the governor proposes, the legislature may take issue with various parts of it or pass other things, but then toward the end of the legislative session, or even into a little overtime, which went, I think, as much as like 17 or 19 days in Jim Edgar's first year in 1990 or 91, the governor and the 4 leaders, the Democrats, Republicans, House and Senate, they get in a room, they work things out. Sometimes they spend hours together, they figure out what they can trade, and they get a budget. And then there's an agreement, and then within a day or two, it's all put into bill form, and the houses pass it, and they leave for the summer. And now we're into the 3rd month without. When's the last time the governor and the leaders got together, and what's going on?
So a couple of the State House journalists, every time Madigan's been having these weekly press conferences, we'll ask him, when's the last time you met with the governor? And when we first started these press conferences around the summer, himself meeting with the governor was maybe a couple weeks ago, he said. Then it started turning into, oh man, maybe a month. Then it turned into, I can no longer remember. So we all kind of got together. We were thinking, when was the last time they actually had a meeting? And we believe that the last time that they had a meeting, all 4 leaders and the governor in a room, was the end of May. I remember standing outside the governor's office, talking to each one of the leaders when they had this meeting. It was before session had even ended. And every lawmaker that I've talked to, every leader that I've talked to since then has said, we could have meetings, but we've had, maybe 1 or 2 meetings here and there where, Cullerton and the governor will meet, but they're not productive. They're not productive. Nobody's doing anything. So we're seeing a gridlock. Something else that's interesting is I asked Madigan maybe about a month ago, I made the assumption that you guys are going to sit down in a room together and figure this out eventually. Mm-hmm. And he told me, not necessarily. He said, I don't necessarily think it'll go that way. The General Assembly is very important in this process, which was something kind of mind-blowing to us who cover the State House, because it has never been done that way.
Well, Andy, should anybody get the blame for this? I mean, I know I have talked to some people who think, the governor's the elected leader of the state should be calling these meetings, and I think that the leaders of the legislature have said they would show up.
Right.
And the governor also does say, by the way, that our staffs are working all the time, but I'm not sure how much we're seeing evidence of that.
Right. It's hard to see the evidence for that. I mean, even if, either way, if they were working together, if they weren't working together, it'd be hard to sort of trace that. But I think whoever you want to blame for it, in a lot of instances, with this being the governor's first year in office, I think perhaps the viewpoint of citizens is that he'll wear the jacket for it, regardless of whether you think it's ultimately his fault. If you look at what changed between last year and previous years when we did have a budget,
a different governor,
and now we have a different governor, right? And we have divided government again. So I think that's the impression that folks get. But I use the analogy. This is probably the 3rd or 4th time I've used it on this show. But trying to assign specific blame for a lot of things at the State House is like trying to find the end of the magician's handkerchief. It keeps coming out, and it has different colors and everything.
Well, so. It is interesting because obviously the global look at what's going on here is the governor wants, he doesn't want to agree. He says we need more revenue to patch the hole that the Democrats left in their unbalanced budget, which was about $4 billion at the time, although Leslie Munger says it could go to about 8 or 12 by the end of the year. But the governor wants his turnaround agenda, which is tort reform, is a new way to draw political maps in season, term limits, but also workers' comp changes, those kinds of things. Oh, and also limitations on collective bargaining and paying prevailing wage for local governments. He wants to give them that opportunity to be a little bit towards right to work, which he's not exactly asking for anymore. Democrats who have a giant majority in the legislature say they don't want to do that. And so that's why we're just kind of stuck here. Now, I did a column not long ago. I talked to David Yepsen, who great political writer from Des Moines for many years, and he runs the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute at Southern Illinois University now. And also Kent Redfield, a professor emeritus who's sometimes on their show at the U of I in Springfield, both saying, the governor's the leader, so ultimately if the wheels do come off the budget, it will be looked at as the governor's fault. Again, maybe you're right about the magician and the handkerchief, but I'm just saying that was their consensus. Lance Trover, spokesman for the governor, his response to that, which was some very strong language, Yepsen saying the governor shouldn't be talking so poorly about labor unions and stuff. Lance Trover said, well, every every professor can have his opinion. That was the response from the administration on that one. So I guess we'll see where it goes.
Right.
One of the other manifestations of this budget problem is while state workers are being paid, some of the health care plans they are under are not. So this is obviously, in places with a lot of concentration of state workers like Springfield, a problem. Any way forward on this? And it's some health plans are paying and some health plans are not, kind of depending, I guess the ones that the state self-insures are not and the HMOs are so far.
It's a confusing time. We covered the dental story earlier this week because dental payments are not being paid to dental providers, to dentists. Big problem because there are a lot of dentists here in the capital city who, one that I talked to, 40% of his practice is state workers. So these people are coming in and he's not being paid for their services. Some dentists are requiring upfront payment because they're used to working with the state and they say, hey, you can pay us and then the state will pay you back when there is a budget or when they decide to cut you that check. So it's a lot of confusion for people because each provider is handling it differently. They're trying to understand their own insurance plans, which I think most people don't understand fully on their own anyway.
You just like to go and give them the card.
Right,
and
like
say,
here's my card, make
Here's
it
a
work.
copay.
Right.
Nobody actually reads the fine print. So I think trying to figure out if your plan is affected and seeing other plans affected and knowing, hey, maybe that's mine a month from now if this continues, I think it's creating a lot of uncertainty, especially here in Springfield.
And your colleague at the State Journal Register, Dean Olson, has covered this in
He does
total
a wonderful,
depth.
Yeah, he's our health writer. He does a wonderful job.
And he pointed out, you've heard about some of this, at least anecdotally in the past, with payments being delayed, where providers want the patients to come in and sort of pay out of pocket, at least initially. But having this sort of this mass kind of policy for the time being, while the budget impasse continues, of saying, well, we can't pay for 140 plus thousand folks is really unprecedented.
Very interesting. Well, on almost a flip side of maybe not something as serious, but let's talk about the state lottery. Obviously, we just had a story, another one of my colleagues, Doug Finke, just had a story. Lottery profits are down, I think, to the state about $125 million in the last year. But on the other hand, the other problem, which has actually made some national news, is that part of the state budget that's not appropriated is lottery winnings over $25,000. So we've got some people who can't even get payouts if they're big winners in the lottery. So what message does that send, and what can be done about that?
Yeah, I think like you said, it's made national headlines. It's one of the more public manifestations of how this budget impasse is playing out. I mean, you hear very serious stories of needy people around the state who get hurt by it, but then you always hear about people winning the lottery, and now those lottery winners can't even get the money. It's just another example, I think, of how this thing is shaking out that maybe nobody really thought of before, or maybe the lottery winners themselves did, or the people who work at the lottery, but to us at the Capitol and to the citizenry at large, this is another thing that's just kind of like, all right, well, we'll make note of that.
It's another unintended consequence.
Right.
I think a lot of people have had a distrust in Illinois government for a while now, and I think this only compounds the distrust that they've had. Now they're looking to the government and they're saying, you can't even pay my lottery winnings if I win? Like, I can't trust the lottery. I can't trust the state to handle things. And so I don't think it makes us look good in any way, shape, especially when it's getting national coverage.
Right. I don't know if it's a fair question or not, but clearly what the governor wants, he wants his turnaround agenda, changes in the court system and term limits and workers' compensation costs, et cetera. And he is basically saying, I'm not going to compromise on budget stuff until that happens. Do either of you think that will happen? Does he have a chance for these pressure points, even the ones that still exist and the unintended consequences, to build where he will get that? Or does this just go on till January? Do we run on court orders for the entire fiscal year through next June?
I think there's two ways to look at this. You ask a lot of the lawmakers and people who are involved in the process, and they say, we honestly don't know what's happening anymore. It started with, this will get figured out eventually, and it is now evolved into, I have no idea what's going on, and I honestly don't know when the end is coming. It's interesting that you phrased the question that way. I asked Kent Redfield, we mentioned him earlier, I asked him this week, I said, did the governor dig himself into a hole of sorts? Did he dig himself a hole by saying, I'm not going to compromise, here's my agenda? Because is there any way that he comes out of this a winner? because he has to compromise in the end. So if he doesn't get his whole agenda, was this worth it? And Kent said, well, we don't know. It's a big gamble. The governor took a gamble here, and it either will be a big loss or a big payout. So we'll just have to wait and see.
And I will say, from the governor's perspective, as he says it, he has compromised. On the other hand, he's not allowing, he keeps saying, like, the legislature hasn't voted on any of my plans. Well, they've voted on a property tax freeze, a 2-year property tax freeze, like 13 times in the House, but they don't include what he wants, which is that local government thing, which allows them to get around some of their union contracts to say you don't have to collectively bargain with your employees.
And the Senate's trying to do the same thing. The Senate, the House version, you can call that a sham if you want to from the Republican perspective, because it is Rauner's language in their bill sponsored by a Democrat. But the Senate attempted to meet the governor halfway and put together a property tax freeze proposal that they voted on and tried to get passed, and the governor said no because it didn't include the collective bargaining prevailing wage reforms that he wanted. So I don't know I think the politicians in Springfield who've been there a long time have a different idea of what compromise is than the governor who has just come in.
And especially when these issues cut to the core of both sides' constituencies so strongly. You have the governor, a businessman, catered to business interests, talked about wanting to run Illinois government like a business once he got into office. Talking about raising the causation standard for workers' compensation, making it harder for businesses to get lawsuits filed against them. Those are things that are just right in his wheelhouse, in his constituency's wheelhouse. And the same thing goes for the Democrats. You have any sort of anti-labor or what is perceived as an anti-labor bill, and it's going to be tough for them to do anything but dig their heels in. If we're going to get a compromise out of this, it's still difficult. We've been saying it all summer. It's still difficult to see how it materializes.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I have sometimes made a comparison in conversations with, the governor talked about Scott Walker as one of his role models, and Scott Walker, of course, did, as governor of Wisconsin, severely erode union strength there because they got a provision where you don't have to, pay the fair share dues if you're a teacher. A lot of teachers dropped out. I think they lost maybe half of their members. And Scott Walker, of course, is running for president, was in Illinois this last week, and trying to save his presidential campaign basically called for an end to unionization of federal employees. I don't think, having seen the debate the other night on CNN, that Walker is perhaps catching the kind of traction that he wanted, but that was a rather bold move he wanted to bring to. But he had a Republican legislature in Wisconsin when he did this, and Governor Rauner, who spent twice as much as any other governor ever did to get elected, his $65 million, with about half of it from himself to get elected, has an overwhelmingly Democratic legislature. So anyway, it just creates a problem, I think, trying to do what Scott Walker did, because you don't have the same conditions. And as David Yepsen said from Southern Illinois, we have a rich labor tradition in Illinois that you're trying to overcome all at once, and maybe taking it incrementally would be a better way to go.
Right, and I just think, just to add to that, pointing out the sort of uniqueness of the situation here with a divided government and labor being such a central issue. The other state that still doesn't have a budget enacted is Pennsylvania, and they sort of have a mirror image with a Democratic governor and Republican legislators. But their battle isn't really involving sort of the same union and those types of campaign issues that we saw last year. So it is a little bit of a different situation, but hey, they don't have a budget either.
Okay. In the middle of all of this tumult in state government, we have had some changes within the last few days. A senator from Park Ridge, a suburb of Chicago, Dan Katowski, announced that he's stepping down. This was kind of unexpected. He's leaving the legislature. Someone will probably be appointed to replace him, and then that might turn that suburban district into a battleground where maybe the Republicans would think they have an opportunity. He is going to run an agency called ChildServe. It takes care of at-risk youth and families. And I guess he came out of the nonprofit world and has been in the Senate, I believe, 9 years, and he's leaving. He was also an advocate for gun control, which in the age of concealed carry imposed by national federal court decisions, he probably wasn't happy about that. But so we've had some other people too, Senator Dan Duffy from the suburbs, Senator John Sullivan from Rushville, Senator Darren LaHood, who just got elected to Congress, are all leaving, and at least a couple members of the House, somebody named Ed Sullivan, really, and Adam Brown from Decatur. So what is this? Is it more than usual, or what do we got?
Yeah, it's it's hard for me to answer whether it's more than
I
usual
should know
going
that,
back
but-
several years.
Yeah,
but,
and there's often turnover, but
it maybe isn't terribly surprising when you consider that candidates are circulating petitions. This is the time for them to sort of step aside if they are thinking about it and a successor wants to get a chance to sort of get their name out there. But also, part of it could certainly be the complications that have resulted from this sort of gridlock this year, this more gridlock than maybe we're used to getting. So that could certainly be part of the equation now, but it's not terribly uncommon for a legislator, a state senator, even if he's been there for a while, to want to move to a private sector with perhaps a better paying job. And
yeah, Jordan, I just did a column this week on Avery Bourne in the 95th House District. She was appointed to a vacancy. She's 23 years old and on leave from law school, and you've got like at least 4 other candidates who want to run for that job. Why would anybody want to be a legislator at this time? That's the question.
That is a good question that I don't have the answer to, because I said I don't know why anyone's running to be the governor of this state at the moment. I don't know why anyone would want to be a legislator at this point.
It's a tough job.
Yeah, and especially a freshman legislator, someone who's not exactly used to how things work. I don't know if I'd want to come in exactly at this point and try and figure out the system, but people say on the flip side, maybe we need fresh blood in the legislature. Maybe there's too many people who have spent too much time in the state government and stuff like that. So we'll see if any new people, if a number of open seats actually make it. I mean, people have complained that the way the districts are drawn will only serve incumbents and people, we might just end up with the same party dynamic.
Yeah, well, it would be, clearly the governor has, his own campaign fund has about $20 million. There's another campaign fund that his friends started that has 8. And that's more money than is usually the parties have to spend. So he has talked about trying to, move the numbers in the legislature, targeting races, and we'll see if that happens. And clearly the Democrats are raising money to try to fight that as we go on. There was a story from the Associated Press late in the week that some employees in the comptroller's office under Leslie Munger were being paid by the comptroller's office, but helping, or perhaps even before Leslie Munger took office, but from the comptroller's budget line, and perhaps after the death of Judy Bartopinka, including Nancy Kimmy, who was the chief of staff and now has gone into lobbying. But they were working with the governor's office trying to help him hire his people, but they were on the comptroller's payroll. Is that inside baseball, or will anybody care about that? Because it was actually Kent Redfield, as we were talking about, quoted in the story saying that appears to be at least borderline inappropriate.
right.
If you're appropriated to spend money for the comptroller's office, which pays state bills, you shouldn't be helping the governor be an employment agency for him. Let him have his own people do that.
Right. Anecdotally, at least, it cuts to maybe a little bit of what the governor campaigned on, which is shake up Springfield, do business differently, and you have state workers who are effectively helping what is typically a private enterprise and a transition team on state time, whether the cost was overly burdensome or perhaps negligible. I don't know exactly, but I think just the issue itself is one that is another one that people could lob at the governor.
Well, the Democrats have basically attacked this governor for doing what he criticized the past governor for doing, which is offshoring, they call it, which is having about, I don't know, it was a lot of governor staff people, like, I don't know if it was 20 or more, who were paid by other agencies but working for the governor's office. And he said, well, Pat Quinn did that. Well, yeah, but you ran to be not Pat Quinn.
It's optics. A lot of it right now is a battle of public opinion, and so everything comes down to optics. How does it look to the person who's looking from the outside? How does this look to voters? How does this look to members of my party and the other party? What can they use to spin? Illinois has never, I don't think, ever had this much politics at play at once. And so everything that someone can get their hands on to spin one way or the other is a war of optics. And this is one side where Ronner might just lose.
Well, we will see where it goes. Jordan, in the recent special election to replace Aaron Schock, I know you were in Peoria with, I was going to say Ray LaHood, but it's Darren LaHood, Ray's son. And then this week he was sworn in. He easily defeated the Democrat Rob Mellon for Aaron Schock's seat, 18th Congressional District, which takes in like Peoria, what do we got, Bloomington,
Quincy.
Much of Sangamon County, but just the west side of Springfield. So Darren LaHood being sworn in, what changes would you expect from Aaron Schock or for the district?
I think he's going to come in and he's going to be a very conservative leader. He ran a very conservative campaign, and he said that he's going to make sure that those conservative values are at play when he makes votes. He's very focused on transparency and ethics at this point. He says he wants to get the best team in place to make sure that they're following all of the rules. That, of course, at the top of everyone's mind because of Aaron Schock's departure. So I think you're going to see him be a lot more low-key than Aaron Schock was. He's promised to come home to Peoria every weekend. He's got a family.
Wife and 3 kids.
Yes.
That's right.
So he says, he's not going to get caught up in the political machine that is Washington, D.C. He's going to be a Peoria native, going to D.C., making decisions and coming home. And he says that's how he's going to stay grounded.
Yeah.
And he's someone who's familiar with the institution, obviously, with his dad having served in Congress and him having served as a staffer before. The familiarity with the institution, I think, no matter what line you're in, is always helpful.
And I did notice in a couple of press reports that he's stressing that his office is now very bland. It's beige because Aaron Schock, as we know, kind of got in trouble when the bright red Downton Abbey theme office got a little publicity, and then all of a sudden everybody started looking at how Aaron Schock was spending money, and here we are today. There's a happy story around Springfield area this week, and I just want to mention it. Someone named Ashley Aldridge, who is age 19, heard someone yelling right outside her window in Auburn, and it was Earl Mormon, who was 75 years old, and his scooter was stuck on railroad tracks. She ran out the window. She got him off the tracks about a second before the train came. She's been getting some national publicity, and it's nice in this atmosphere to be able to congratulate her and have a good story to end with. With that, Andy Maloney, Jordan Abudayyeh, thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. I'm Bernie Schoenberg, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.